Okay, next up, we've got Ella, hopefully. Oh, there we go. Come on down, Ella. Another speaker from GearSet, going to come at us with a different angle now, but some more important concepts to cover, so thank you.
Is there a clicker? Oh, sorry. Thank you. So great. Great to see all of you here today. If you can't tell, I'm from GearSet, and my name is Ella, and I work as a user experience designer, or UX for short. But yeah, before we get started, I'd like to just get an idea of who's in the room today. So do we have any other designers in the room? Just raise your hand if you are a designer. Okay, so a couple of designers. Do we have any developers in the room? More developers. Any product managers? A couple of product managers. Awesome. So yeah, when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, I wanted it to be something that was going to be, useful for people here. So based off, the crowd, I'm hoping that we can all take something away from this. And really what I'm going to be talking about is why it's so important for us to collaborate really closely together as product teams, mainly focusing on developers and designers, and just really how some of my own experiences have shaped my perspective on this. So whilst I'm relatively new into my career, I have seen firsthand the impact that really strong collaboration has on creating exceptional products. So today, I'm going to share 3 stories with you throughout my journey so far, and some of the key messages that I've learned from that, and hopefully I can share some of these learnings and you can take something away from it. So the first story is when I got my first job out of university, and it was at a machine learning startup, and there I learned about the impact of bringing developers into the design process way earlier. The next story is when I moved to GearSet, and one of my first projects there, and how I really learned about the importance of sharing information. And then the final project is also at GearSet, but this one focuses on how we need to adapt to different team and people's workflows. But yeah, like I said, my name is Ella and I'm a UX designer, and really what I do day to day as a designer is I look at user problems and figure out how we can create design solutions to those problems to help users achieve desired outcomes. And naturally, in my role, I work really closely with product managers and developers. So my career, I should probably take you back to how it started. Really, it started, when I was younger and loving to create. So I loved creating, but I also loved problem solving. And throughout my studies, I studied art. So I studied art at GCSE, at A-level, and I had the intention of going to university to study art. But at that time, I remember I was studying for my A-levels, and I had this moment where I was using, I think it was Excel. I must have been using it for some kind of budget tracker or something. But I realized that whilst I was using the software, under the hood, this is actually a pretty complex tool. There's the way that you can, create cells, write formulas, and see that relationship, and there's so much that you can do with it. But it was a pretty easy thing to use. Anyone can use it to some degree. And it really got me thinking about experiences and digital experiences, and how there are these mystery people creating these experiences and making our lives better. And I realized that I wanted to be one of these people, whoever they were. And this is when I started looking into design. And it wasn't until I went to uni where I actually ended up studying design. I didn't study art. And I learned some really amazing things on my course. So I learned things like human-computer interactions, design thinking, the double diamond, lots of theoretical knowledge into design, and yeah, I absolutely loved it. For me, it was this perfect blend of creativity and problem solving. But it wasn't until my second year that I was introduced to user experience design, particularly when we look at digital interfaces. And for me, this was the perfect thing. It was combining, this creativity and problem solving, but applying it to the digital world. And we see how good experiences in digital products can really bridge the gap between new technology. I mean, has anyone heard of ChatGPT? Like, raise your hand if you've heard of it. It's I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with it, but under the hood, that tool is really complex. There's a LLM underneath it, this model, that if we didn't have that really intuitive chat-like interface, where it feels like you're just messaging a friend when you ask ChatGPT for something, but if we didn't have that, there would be a big blocker for people that didn't know how to code, because they wouldn't be able to use that tool. So, as product people, it's really important for us to help bridge the gap to new tech. And I think it's, really on theme, with the theme of the conference today, that really redefining possible and, what the future is for technology and how we can do this through good experiences. So let me take you to my first project at the startup. So after university, I moved down to Cambridge and I went to work for a machine learning startup. And we were focusing on solving problems for lab scientists working in R&D, research and development. So these were people that were running experiments in labs, trying to achieve desired outcomes for whatever material they were working on. So for example, they might want to increase viscosity of a product whilst keeping the price low. And traditionally, these people would have to run a load of experiments, get those results back, and then analyze those results and then run another load of experiments. And it was really time consuming. But machine learning could come in here. So the product that we were working on had an ML algorithm that would predict the next best experiments to run. So you'd upload your data into this model, and it would tell you the best route you should take to achieve your targets. And it would significantly speed up the process. The issue was that the lab scientists, a lot of the time, were not familiar with code. They were experts in the science field, but they didn't know how to code. So they couldn't get value from this tool, which is where our product came in. So when I joined the company, I was responsible for doing the user experience of this product. And prior to me joining, it was just the engineers who were responsible for it. So they were really happy to have me on board to help out with that. And yeah, just to give you a little insight into what the team looked like, it was a really small company, I think about 25 of us, and we all worked in person, so it was an open plan space, and I sat really closely with the engineers. So I knew them pretty well, and we would chat inside and outside of work. So the team looked a little bit like this. There'd be me, the UX designer, we had one product manager, and we had about 6 developers, a mix of back-end, front-end, and full stack. And the first project that I worked on here, because they hadn't had a designer before, I was able to implement any new process that I wanted to. And on one hand, that was great because there was a lot of flexibility and freedom. But on the other hand, I could have done anything. And the approach that I took is I took my learnings from what I'd learned on my course, which at this point was very theoretical, and I tried to apply it to a work setting. So the design process that I took for this first project looked something like this. So the first stage, I'm not even going to try and use the pointer. The first stage was the discovery, and this is where I worked really closely with the product manager and myself and some other people in the business, but not the developers. And this is where we were uncovering the user problems, really understanding what their problems were, so that we could then start ideating some solutions to solving those problems. But for the ideation stage, again, it was myself iterating on designs and working really closely with the product manager. No developers. And then we got to the prototyping stage, and this is where we would take the ideas that we wanted to explore further, turn them into prototypes, and start testing them with users. But it wasn't until the final stage, when we were happy with the design, that I'd actually brought the developers into the process. And what I did is I wrote a really detailed handoff document trying to capture the ins and outs of this feature and all the edge cases that I could think of. And it was really detailed. It included all the information from those first 4 stages. And I handed it to the devs, and I asked if they had any feedback. And there was nothing. No one asked any questions, so I was thinking, this is brilliant. It's a perfect handoff document. Nothing could go wrong. Well, lots of things did go wrong. So what happened was, for most of the developers, this was the first time that they were seeing that feature. So not only were they trying to learn what the feature was, why we were solving this problem in the first place, they also had to figure out how we were going to build it. And there's just so many moving parts that it was just too much information for one part of the project. The other side of it is, as problems started to arise with feasibility, the devs had solutions to these problems, and these could have been stumped out way earlier in the process if they'd been brought in. So I actually went to my mentor at the time, and they told me that the issue there was that I needed to bring them in closer, way at the start, at the discovery phase. So for the next project that I worked on, I took a slightly different approach. This time I brought the engineers into the first stage of this process. We invited engineers to join customer calls, albeit they didn't always want to join the calls, but that's completely fine. But what we made sure is that we shared the insights from those calls so that they had that information that they needed to know, why are we solving this problem? What space are we exploring? And then as we narrowed in, when we went to the ideation sessions, I hosted these whiteboard sessions where we would come up with ideas as a team. They already had that information around why we were solving this problem. So the ideation sessions, we were all aligned, we all knew what problem we were solving, and everyone could come wearing different hats and offering really different perspectives. And then when we got to the prototyping stage, we decided which designs we wanted to explore further. I would run rounds of user tests. Sometimes the engineers would hop on these calls so they could see firsthand how the users were using, our ideas. But if they didn't, I would make sure that I would share the insights from those calls and share them in our daily stand-ups, because we all worked in person, so it was a very fluid discussion that we had. So testing, and then this meant that when we got to the delivery stage, I didn't need to write a super extensive handoff document, because the engineers knew what we were building. Not only did they understand the problem, but they'd also been a part of the creation process. So we all had a really aligned understanding of what we were solving. So for this handoff document, all I needed to include was a prototype to the design as a bit of a refresher, alongside some bullet points and a space to ask questions or anything there. And really, I think the thing that I'd like you to take away from this is we need to be bringing developers into design processes much earlier. And it had some really good benefits. So, the devs felt more connected to the problem and to the user. And I think that really offers some fulfillment in your job if you know that you're working on something that's going to solve a real problem for somebody. It also meant that we saved a load of time. There was less time for the devs having to read through extensive documentation and also having this back and forth between questions and feasibility concerns. And it also meant that there was better relationships between myself and the developers. Okay, so after I'd worked at the startup, I then moved to a slightly bigger company, and that was GearSet. And I was going from a team of around 25 to a company that I think were over 300 people now. So it was a big shift. It was an astronomical change. I went from being one designer to a team of almost 10 designers. But yeah, I won't talk too much about GearSet, but if you want to come and talk to us on the booth, we'd love to chat with you, so we can chat more then. But really, this is what the change looked like. So I was going from being just myself to a massive team. And the way that the project teams work is when you work on a project at GearSet, you'll have one designer, one product manager, and then one engineering team. And this is usually around 6 engineering teams, 6 engineers. So it was a similar size to my previous company, but you could be working with different product managers and different developers. So one thing that I learned here is that there was a ton of moving parts. And the first project that I worked on at GearSet was with a team that had about 6 engineers, 1 PM, myself, but there was also a lot of stakeholders involved. So the team would post updates to the project on a designated Slack channel. So Slack is just the place that we kind of all collaborate and communicate. I'm sure many of you have used it. But yeah, we had a Slack channel for this particular project where we would send updates. And there was over 50 people in this Slack channel. And, you know, all these people needed to see updates of the project, or maybe they were just interested in it. But it meant that there was a lot of stakeholders, and I needed to take a different approach to how I shared my work. So where previously I could just chat with the engineers in person, I knew everyone in the company really well. Here I took a different approach where I tried to document the design progress as we went through the project. So as and when we were iterating on designs, I had this template that I made for design iterations. So what I'd do is I'd post a prototype of the design, link it at the top of the document. This is Notion, by the way, if anyone has used it. It's a brilliant tool. I'd link the prototype at the top, and then I'd do a breakdown of the features and things that we changed or added into this prototype. And for each of those features, I would do the what, the why, and the assumptions. And the assumptions part became really useful because it meant when we went to user testing, we had a clear space to see what parts of the solution we weren't 100% certain on, or things that we wanted to test and validate. And I did this live, so for me, it was it wasn't extra work that I was having to do outside. It was actually just curating the progress of the project in one place. And this turned out being really useful because it meant that I would post a link to this Notion doc on the Slack channel, and whoever needed to see it could have a clear view of where we were at in the project. And it also meant that we could really easily go back and see, oh, did we think of this problem? Oh, we did, and we didn't do it because of X, Y, and Z. Just a really nice place to track everything. Now, the problem that I had with this project was we actually had a weekly catch-up. And this was on a Thursday every week, and it was about 30 minutes. And during the 30 minutes, we would have an update from the PM, the engineers, and the design side. But what happened is during the week, so much development work would happen. Sometimes the engineers would wait till the week before asking for feedback from me. So if they needed another pair of eyes on a design, or they wanted to just ask something that came up quickly, they would wait until the end of the week. So it meant that a ton of development work had happened, and I had no idea where we were at, what was going on, and what needed my help. Whereas previously, because I worked in person with everyone, it was really easy to just chat face to face. Whereas this team was a hybrid team, so we had a combination of people that were virtual but also in person. So I asked the product manager how they actually keep track of what's going on so they can know when and where they are needed. And she said to me that you need to enter their world. And for this team, that meant entering Shortcut. So Shortcut is a tool that they use to track all of their tickets and what they're working on. It's sort of similar to Jira. But yeah, so what I ended up doing is I ended up just creating myself an account and joining their Shortcut board for this particular project. And it worked really well. It meant whenever they needed a pair of design eyes, they could just tag me on the ticket, and I could just offer the feedback there and then. And it worked well for this team because that was their place of work. That's where they tracked everything. That was their process for that specific team. And a couple of things that I want you to take away from this lesson is that the visibility side is so important. So with my documentation that I made for tracking design progress, it was really useful for people that were interested in the project or needed to know what was going on in the project. And I could share it really easily. I didn't have to set up calls with people to say, where are we at the project? Because they could just see from the documentation. And seeing that chronological development was so useful because, like I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to see, did I explore a route? I can't remember why we didn't do this thing. You have a record of it there. And then the other thing is that the final part is when I entered their world, it was really, I describe it as this push and pull. So sometimes, you know, we might be missing information in our work. So in my case, I needed to see what was going on so I could know when I was needed. But I had to push myself into that position. I think sometimes people don't not share information with you. It's because they don't want you involved. It's more because they just didn't think to invite you. So if you need information, if you need to be on a customer call or something, just go and ask. Go and, you know, push yourself towards those situations. Don't be afraid to join those spaces if you need that information. Okay, and the final project, this was also in GearSet, but this was with a slightly different team. So whereas my first role was mainly in person, the second project was hybrid, this team was all remote, so completely remote team. I hadn't met a lot of the developers in person. I hadn't met a lot of the developers in person, and they were all completely remote. And for the project that we were working on a smaller part of a larger project. And I took my learnings from, you know, the first and second stories because I knew these worked. So the design process, I brought the engineers in early, we iterated together, had the customer calls. This team actually really liked being on customer calls, so they would hop on a lot of the user tests, and you know that was great. And I tried joining their shortcut page because they also use shortcut. Because the previous team within GearSet, I thought, this is the process that, you know, the devs use at GearSet. Okay, I'll join their shortcut. But I soon learned that this team was also really different. Despite also being in GearSet and they're the same company, they worked different. They didn't really use shortcut as much for iterating on, you know, designs and looking at features that they were solving. In fact, some of them hardly even touched it. So I realized that I needed to take a different approach. And what happened was one of the engineers came to me and said that they were feeling a little bit blocked because we also had a meeting like once a week for updates on the project. Whereas this had worked for the other team, this team actually felt blocked by it because they needed you know, design feedback much quicker than having to wait once a week. And they weren't using shortcuts, so I couldn't hop in on their tickets there and then. So we came up with a solution together that we were going to create this little group chat of myself and the devs, where we would work really closely solving the problem, and then we would bring people in when they needed the information. So we would share information with those relative parties, because it was also one of those projects where there was 50+ people in the channel. So what we did is we created the group chat, and it worked great. So what I would do is I still used my Notion docs because they were really useful, but instead of posting it into the Slack channels, I'd post it into the group chat, and we would communicate together, collaborate, set up calls whenever we needed to, you know, discuss the designs, look at assumptions, plan what we were going to try and test in the user evaluations. And it was really, really collaborative, really quick, and it worked perfectly for this team. And I think, yeah, the thing that I'd like you to take away from this is that sometimes group chats can be useful. You know, sometimes you don't need to always be on a public channel if you're working really closely with one team, but also that different teams work really differently and different people work really differently. So I think we should be looking at people over a process. And you know, just because teams are in the same company doesn't mean they're all going to work the same. So this adaptability and being able to work to different people's needs and requirements is super, super important. And you know, for some teams, this idea of frequent updates is also really, really useful, and you know, being able to have these instant feedback loops. Okay. So The final thing that I'd like you to hopefully take away from this talk, if we look back at these stories that I've shared, is that we really need to be bringing in engineers into design processes way earlier. And this idea of exchanging information is super important. And that people work differently. Like I said, even in the same company, people and teams will work differently. So we need to be able to be adaptable and adapt to individuals' workflows. And I think what I've learned from this, where I've seen success and failures, is that it doesn't really matter of the medium of how you do it, as long as you're collaborating and communicating. I think that's the thing that's really important, whether that's through a public channel or just turning over and chatting to someone or through a group chat. It doesn't matter how you do it, just as long as we are communicating and collaborating closely. So thank you for listening. If you want to chat at the booth, we'd be interested in hearing your stories as well.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ella. Anybody questions on that? Oh yeah, okay, there's someone coming that side. It's amazing. I've helped this year, so I'm not running both sides of the stairs.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I can really see myself in all of them. I'm a product designer, so and I work with so many different teams, project managers, and yeah, I totally agree on understanding people and working with them. So just a question around like sort of the handover process. How do you tackle that whenever you're working with so many different teams and projects?
Yeah, I think one thing that I found to be quite useful at the moment is having these Notion pages. Because I'm updating designs and adding tweaks into Notion, I usually just copy and paste the page and then update it as it goes. So I sort of have this live handoff document that's growing, and because the developers have seen that evolve, they are all quite aware of the current state. So at the moment that's actually been enough for doing this handoff process. A lot of the time I'll send the document off to them and they'll just be able to look through it, and then when it's needed they'll send me messages and ask questions, and if it's something that's a little bit bigger, we can set up a call to sort of solve that problem.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any more questions?
No, yeah, great talk, and I totally agree. Communication is vital between whenever you're cross-collaborating. Do you have any tips for like I'm a designer, and then of course like you have the UX, the product teams, how to communicate in terms of the different language used and keeping it, I suppose, high level without going too deep sometimes? Like any tips that you've come across?
Yes, I think so. We've been quite lucky at GearSet where we have, and particularly when we're looking at things like components, when we're building an interface, I think sometimes developers will use really technical terminology for trying to describe a concept. Firstly, don't be afraid to say that you don't understand. I always say if I don't understand something and get people to explain it to me in simple terms, and that tends to really help your own understanding. But also at GearSet we have so we have our Figma design system, but it's also connected to Storybook. I'm not sure if anyone's used that. That's kind of a component library where it manages your components within the code base. And we use that as the source of truth. So all the naming conventions for everything and the descriptions go within Storybook. So I write a lot of that documentation, and we make sure that the developers and designers are using the same terms and have used the same components and understand when we should be using things. And I think that really helps with the alignment, so having one source of truth for stuff like that. Any other questions?
Any more? No, I think that's us. Thank you so much, Ella.